So there have been suggestions that South Africa can lower power cut stages by managing millions of geysers. The country has over 8 million geysers, most of them in Gauteng. The government has suggested smart remote controls to monitor their usage, with the electricity minister saying those plans are well in place. Professor Hartmut Winkler is an energy analyst and physicist at the University of Johannesburg. He joins us now to help us make sense of this. Prof, before we get into conversation, and thank you very much for your time, let's take a listen at what the electricity minister had to say last week.
We have done a computation. We are sitting conservatively with about 8 million geysers, and I did say that if you have 200,000 of these installed, remotely controlled, of course the ones that have got households that have got connected to Wi-Fi, there's a technology that you can use to get access, direct access to those and remotely control, of course, also informing the household user, and then others, they use different forms of technologies, GSM, we use cell phone towers. And it's a configuration of all of those solutions. Once we bring them to bear, some of them will require some degree of financial support, and that's what we are trying to work on, especially for poor households.
We can never get used to load shedding. Now we're introducing geyser shedding. What should we understand about this?
Yes, well, it's going to be quite tricky to implement it as is. They'd be using smart meter technology, which has been introduced elsewhere in the world, but for different reasons. Ultimately, what a smart meter can do is that it makes it possible for the facilities to actually monitor how much electricity is being used remotely. So in other words, you don't need to send meter readers around anymore. You can, and it literally works like, I think it's twice an hour, there'll be a reading taken what your consumption is. It does also help the users to see how much they're using. And apparently, in those countries where they have introduced it, households voluntarily often use less electricity simply because they can see how much they're using. They can see, oh, I'm putting this heater on and my consumption goes up enormously. Maybe I should switch it off. So, in other words, you kind of see, you don't only see your expenditure at the end of the month when you get your bill, but you can literally see it on there. So apparently they have had successes in countries where they've introduced this measure, where people have simply become more electricity conscious and have of their own accord tried to save electricity. But ultimately, to put this on a geyser, it would raise us to a different level of sophistication. I'm not sure exactly how they actually want to do it, because the way it works is that the electricity comes from, if you're a typical household, the electricity will come from an electricity pole outside, will go into your house past the meter, and then it comes to your distribution board, and people will be familiar with those. There's all these about a dozen switches there. One of those is normally reserved for the geyser. Now, if you only want to block the geyser, you would have to put these meters somewhere between the geyser and your distribution board. That's not normally where those meters are. In theory, I think it can be done. There's another worry as well, is that if you have those there, how easy is it to simply bypass it? In other words, essentially to have an illegal connection to monitor. I think some people would do that. So in theory, I think it's a good idea that the country, in addition to talking about new generation capacity, also looks at ways of saving wasteful electricity expenditure. That certainly is a problem in the country. There's many ways in which the public or organizations or corporations can reduce their electricity consumption. So it's a good to start talking about this, but whether this technology ultimately will work the way Eskom and the government seem to hope it will, I'm a little bit skeptical at this point, but certainly we shouldn't dismiss it just because of those concerns.
Okay. Well, let's maybe look at the other countries implementing this for different reasons. What are those reasons?
It's largely to make it easier to actually look at how much people have been using. So in other words, it no longer makes it necessary to send around a meter reader once a month. We very often can't get onto your property anyway, so they end up sending estimates and so on. So all that would no longer be an issue. You would, as a user, literally be able to see on an ongoing basis. In order to do that, you'd need an extra device, but that you can link it to a computer, so you can literally see how, in the course of the day, your electricity consumption goes up and down. It does then make you realize that the moment something goes up, that people will think about whether this is really necessary, or are they higher today than they were yesterday, and if so, why? Is there something maybe that's not right with the system? But that's just ultimately the reason it was introduced in other countries, more of a convenience.
Okay.
I must say, however, that it has also been used to cut off defaulting customers. So it is possible for the facility to simply say, well, so-and-so hasn't paid their bills for a month or so, so let's simply cut them off. So maybe that is also something that Eskom is thinking about, because it is one of their major problems at the moment. Eskom is just simply not able to recuperate the electricity from households which are not paying. So I'm sure that's on their mind as well.
Yeah, Prof, let's not give City Power ideas as well, because they're also going on that drive. But when you take a look at a country like South Africa, we're already inconvenienced by the fact that we do not have electricity. And now the prospect of not having whatever it is that you used to use to actually get yourself clean, the prospect that you're not going to be able to have that's also rather discomforting.
Yes, one should mention though that geysers are one of the largest factors in electricity consumption. And especially if you have a situation where your thermostat doesn't work. In other words, the geyser just keeps making the water hotter and hotter. The thermostat should be set at a temperature which is sort of the absolute maximum of what you want the water to be. After that, it should switch itself off. Even with that, boiling water, and whether it's in the geyser or with a kettle, is one of the most electricity-intensive operations, what normally happens in a household. So it's not wrong to target the use of geysers and that, because that indeed, if you could literally switch off everyone's geyser, so you'd have the minor inconvenience of maybe not having hot water, although usually the hot water lasts for a very long time. So if you just simply cut off somebody's hot water for a few hours, the water is still likely to be quite warm by the time you use it. So the idea of targeting geysers is not bad. I'm just not sure whether these technologies are going to ultimately be able to do that.
Yeah.
Maybe the easier way is to encourage people to use solar geysers, because those work quite well also, and then they don't have the complication that they link to the electrical system and so on. And that might be an alternative if one just simply wants to bring down the electricity consumption.
Because we also don't know the cost of these devices that may potentially go onto the geysers.
That's right.
Can't imagine it's a cheap exercise.
I don't think it would be, and so as a result, yes, it would cost something. It's also something on a technical level. If you really want to install them in every household in the country, that's going to take you years to go through. So on a practical level, I don't think it's going to help reduce load shedding in the next 2 or 3 years. In the long term, yes, we need to look at any sort of measure which brings down electricity consumption or makes it our consumption more efficient and used for what we really need it rather than wasting it. But I think there's certainly, one can explore these sort of options, but there's other options as well.
There's other options as well. Maybe 2, 3 other options?
Yes, well, one can look at the solar geyser program. Introducing smart meters, just heightening the awareness of electricity consumption. I think that certainly helps. Also looking at when we do drive around at night, then we can always see lots of lights being left on, probably lots of heaters being left on. So it's something that in this country we haven't really addressed very thoroughly. It's also the question of energy efficient buildings, which is something which is considered for many of the newer buildings around, but it's maybe not being driven as much as it could. But you can build a house or build an office block in such a way that you literally minimize the need for heating, the need for light, and so on. That I think we maybe need to look at more closely.
Prof, thank you so much for your time and your patience with us. Professor Hartmut Winkler is an energy analyst and physicist at the University of Johannesburg.